Well, thank you everyone for joining us today for this great policy discussion on independent contractor and labor policy issues that are popping up in states such as California, other states such as New York, and at the federal level. Joining us for this session today will be our friends from the International Franchise Association and Littler Mendelson. Both are certainly experts when it comes to labor policy, independent contracting, and joint employer issues. Leading the panel today will be Jeff Hanscom, who is the Vice President of State Government Relations at the International Franchise Association. Michael Lehman, who is the Vice President of Federal Government Relations at the International Franchise Association. And Michael Latito, Littler Workplace Policy Institute. First, I'd like to just walk through a few quick housekeeping tips before we kick off the panel. If you'd like to ask our panelists questions during the presentation, we'll be sure to answer those at the end. But in order to ask those questions, you'll be able to submit them through Pathwell's chat box feature for this session. The chat box will also be used to share any handouts and links during the presentation. If you're interested in rewatching this workshop, please note that this will be recorded and we will be distributing this panel through various ALEC sources later this week, such as social media pages and ALEC Connect. And you'll also be seeing this video in upcoming monthly newsletters for our CIED task force. Now to kick off the session, I'm going to hand it on over to IFA's VP of State Government Relations, Jeff Hanscom.
Thanks, Josh. Afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to my appropriately holiday-themed living room here. Good to be talking with you. As Josh mentioned, Jeff Hanscom, VP State Government Relations at the International Franchise Association. What we're talking about here today is California's AB5, California's recent passage of Proposition 22. The ABC test, where it's going, what it means, both in the state level, federally with the new incoming administration, and what you all, both as state legislators as well as other government affairs professionals, need to know and think about as these issues are cropping up. So, we have obviously somewhat of a limited time, so we'll get right to it. This all began, it began with a Dynamex, the California Supreme Court case that was decided a few years ago. And then it really gained some momentum back in 2019 when the California State Legislature passed AB5 that was subsequently signed into law by Governor Newsom and became effective January 1 of 2020. And what AB5 did or does is put in place the ABC test for independent contractor status under the California Labor Code. For those of you who are not familiar, the ABC test is, as you would imagine, a three-part test to determine who's an independent contractor and who is, who's an employee. Three parts are: worker is free from control and direction, performs work that is outside of the usual hiring entity's core business, and the worker is customarily engaged in an independently established trade. So why, without going into all the history of Dynamex and how that got to be the California Supreme Court, really what was the onus behind, the impetus, I should say, behind AB5? If you listen to the California legislature and most of the proponents, it was aimed at the gig economy, the Ubers, the Lyfts, the Postmates of the world, and working to, legislatively reclassify those folks as statutory employees of Uber and Lyft and all the other gig economy. In reality, while we would have done that, or it could have done that, it also, I've used this expression before when talking to legislators and other folks in California and beyond. It was actually, it was really a bazooka we're aiming at a mosquito, right? Not that Uber and Lyft and the gig economy is a small section of the economy, but there are a lot more folks that are impacted by the passage or are impacted by the passage of AB5 into law. Some of which obviously are our members of the franchise community. But there are countless others, musicians, photographers, freelance writers, the list goes on and on. So much so that the legislation actually contained at its inception or original passage, Michael Latito will spot me on this, but 50 plus different exemptions for folks that were not covered by AB5. And then after that, in 2021, the California legislature readdressed the issue and passed a whole bunch of other exemptions about folks that aren't covered by AB5. And then after that, you just had the election where the California voters approved Proposition 22, which specifically exempts exempts by creating a third category of worker outside of independent contractor or employee for the gig economy folks. So now, what are you left with? We're left with ABC is still on the books, still the law of the land in California, but it doesn't apply to the gig economy folks who were the original, or if you believe the legislature intent or goal of this legislation. So what's happening? There's been an ongoing discussion at the legislative level in California to continue passing exemptions. At some point, you chip away at the foundation enough and theoretically the entire house of cards would fall. There has been there are ongoing lawsuits. International Franchise Association, along with the Asian American Hotel Owners Association, we have sued the great state of California to clarify that AB 5, in our view, and its application to franchising is preempted by federal law. That case was only recently filed about 2 weeks ago. Truckers have filed suit, and there's a whole bunch of others. So, what else are we seeing? California, obviously a bellwether state, especially for the progressive side of the aisle. This issue is not going to be limited to California. Hasn't been limited to California. We already saw it pop up in New Jersey. They tried to slip through their own version of AB 5 during their lame duck session last year. They almost did. We've heard this come up in places like Illinois, certainly in places like in Albany, in New York, in Maryland, and a whole host of other places across the country. And it's not just, we don't think it will just be, the California, the states that mirror California's political makeup. We think that this could be coming to, a red state near you without, really too much notice. And this is an issue that folks can get a lot of support on, can generate and snowball very quickly, especially within the gig economy folks. And there's a whole lot of grassroots support that the other side can gin up. So, what are we going to do about it? What are we trying to do about it? Obviously partnering with ALEC and working within the CIED task force and some of the working groups there to help to develop some model legislation that we think will hopefully forestall future AB 5 copycats in other states. This issue is intimately tied to the issue of joint employer, which is could be a whole other panel. But really, following the roadmap of that issue, and we were successful, and we're still working at this issue at the state levels in working on proactive legislation that would clarify joint employment relationships, at least in the franchise model. We're partnered with 21 different states to enact legislation in that regard. And I think a similar path is the best one forward for us on this particular issue, in order to, like I said, basically forestall or put a roadblock in place, or I shouldn't say roadblock. I should put in common sense statutory language that clarifies who's an independent contractor and who's a statutory employee, and doesn't get us into the same mess that California now finds itself in. That's we think what is the best case scenario, is that we partner with ALEC and a number of the state folks out there that we have worked with over the years to, like I said, put forward common sense policy that will make clear, the IC versus employee debate. But obviously, I shouldn't say obviously. We have had, I think, a changing of the guard here in DC, or at least we will in 50 some odd days, give or take, or whatever my math is. And obviously the incoming administration will have some policies that are probably similar to the administration from 4 years ago, and that there were a number of those issues that were being discussed then. And there are a number of those issues, some of them, the ABC test is contained in the PRO Act. A lot of those things that the incoming administration, I think, will be very interested in from a federal level. So I'll kick it over to my colleague, Mike Lehman, to give you a little bit of a snapshot of what we see coming down the pike in DC.
Thanks a lot, Jeff, and season's greetings from DC to everyone here. Appreciate the chance to be with all of you. And let me just say that, the proposition, as Jeff mentioned, the Proposition 22 result showed that California voters value the flexibility and entrepreneurship that's encouraged by independent contracting. And just a remarkable result that we're going to keep leaning on. While 2/3 of California voters voted for Joe Biden, those same people reaffirmed independent contractors. So that has implications for franchise business opportunities and all contractors of all stripes. But let me pivot to this conversation to the federal level, because certainly all eyes are on Georgia right now, control of the U.S. Senate is on the ballot there almost 1 month from today. But the headline of the election from our perspective is that we have a president-elect in Joe Biden, who was the first general election candidate to include anti-franchising language right in his campaign platform. And I want to read you briefly, just 2 sentences, what he wrote on his site. His website says he wants to ensure workers can bargain with the employer that actually holds the power, including franchisors, and ensure those employers are accountable for guaranteeing workplace protections. There's a few more provisions, but they want, what the Biden administration will want to do is increase liability for franchisors through both the independent contractor status issue that Jeff alluded to, also the joint employer issue. Both would impose new liability on franchise brands with regard to their franchisees and their employees in a couple different ways. And there's various ways that the Biden administration will try to enact these policies. The first I'll mention is a bill that you should have no reason to have ever heard of yet, and that's called this Worker Flexibility and Small Business Protection Act. It was a bill introduced really to codify the campaign language, I think, that I just read, introduced just before the election. So seen no action on this bill yet, but this bill would have the effect of reclassifying many traditional independent contractors as employees, including franchisees. So our worst fears about AB 5 would be realized by this legislation. And it's not a niche bill. It's introduced by the lead Democrat on the Senate Labor Committee, Patty Murray of Washington State. And it's unclear the bill will see any real action in the future, but it's a de facto automatic liability for franchisors and makes them responsible for their franchisees' employees, demotes franchisees themselves into employees of their brand. A really remarkable sweeping legislation. But the second bill that is more high profile, the Biden administration is certainly supportive of, is called the PRO Act. This was a bill that Biden mentioned by name over and over throughout the campaign. Not that anyone knew what it was, but his most ardent union supporters certainly knew about the bill, and they liked the bill very much because the PRO Act is candidly a very unbalanced laundry list of over 30 pro-union provisions, all cobbled together to make employee relations really miserable for businesses in numerous sectors of the economy. And more importantly to franchising, it wouldn't just change the way employers can communicate or operate during organizing drives, but the way the PRO Act would amend federal labor law, it would transform our business model and really change the way that franchise brands are able to sell licenses to third-party small business owners and really threaten entrepreneurship and our all-American dynamic business model. The PRO Act would do 2 things to franchising. One, it would impose the very harmful Obama-era joint employer standard. But 2, the PRO Act would establish a possibly even more harmful AB 5 style independent contractor standard, but do so across all 50 states and without any of the industry exemptions that Jeff referenced earlier. And the PRO Act is not a niche bill either. Again, Biden has called for its passage once he's president, and the PRO Act already passed the Democratic-controlled House earlier this year in February before the pandemic hit. And third, I want to note that a Democratic-controlled Department of Labor will also have many bites at this labor apple. We've seen the Trump Department of Labor finalize, in our view, very positive, clear rules on both joint employment and independent contractor status. We can expect a Biden Department of Labor over the next 4 years to try to issue their own guidance on both of those issues to try to reverse the Trump efforts. and a host of other measures that they'll take at other agencies. So, overall, federally, both houses of Congress will have narrower margins, remarkably narrow margins, really. So these bills are going to have a hard time going very far, at least if we at IFA have anything to say about it. And I just want to put a finer point on how unfair some of these proposals are to franchising. And just by noting that federal trademark law has a unique impact on franchising, and not to get too arcane, but federal trademark law that governs our business format requires that owners of trademarks maintain a certain level of control over their franchisees. So in other words, a franchisor, in order to preserve their trademark under federal law, they have to have manage certain control over their license holders, their franchisees, to maintain the quality of service, the uniform customer experience, and everything else that goes into owning a brand. And a brand can be viewed as abandoning its trademark if those controls aren't upheld. It's these exact same controls that are required by federal law that too many Democrats, unfortunately, are trying to use against franchising in both the independent contractor and joint employer policy pushes that they have. So our members are really stuck in between these two sides, and it's an unfortunate dynamic that's playing out against our awesome business model. But overall, narrow margins in Congress over the next 2 years, regardless of Georgia, should keep most of this stuff bottled up in Congress. And the fact that Proposition 22 passed in California clearly shows that voters see value in independent contractor status and freedom here. So that should give policymakers like many of you some real proof that you're on the side of angels when you defend franchising and independent contractors of all stripes. So with that, thanks a lot for my portion. And now I will introduce the venerable Michael Latito of Littler.
The vulnerable or the venerable?
What did I say?
Know. Whatever you said. Hi, Mike. Thanks very much. Thanks, Jeff. I'm batting cleanup here. So I'm going to try to make a few very specific points. On the joint employer situation that Mike mentioned, 18 state attorney generals filed suit alleging that the Department of Labor rule was improper. We have intervened in that suit as a full participant on behalf of a number of groups, including the International Franchise Association. When I say we, my law firm, Littler Mendelson. That case is now an appeal to the Second Circuit. And we hope that the first round of briefs will be filed before January 20. This case will go on for some period of time, and I think go to the Supreme Court. So if you don't mind, I have an ask. And the ask is, we need state attorney generals to counter the 18 state attorney generals that brought the lawsuit. And we need amicus brief support in that particular case. So watch that very, very carefully. And if you have some influence with your state attorney general, it'd be great if they could participate. The state attorney generals in the past have been great on some initiatives that I've worked on, most notably the persuader rule during the Obama years. We couldn't have done what we did in order to negate the rule without the support of the state attorney general. So hopefully you'll give that some thought and perhaps have some discussions with people. On the independent contractor issue, you can see you can get very weedy on these things. Let me try to step back a little bit. Why is this happening? Well, we have more and more people that just want to be independent. They don't want to have a traditional employment relationship. They may be going to school. They may be taking care of mom. They may have somebody at home who's got COVID. They have different kinds of priorities in their lives. And they don't want to have a BOSS because maybe they had a BOSS who was a double SOB backwards and they don't like the system. They want to be independent. And this is going on all over the country. And we have a set of laws that were principally passed in the 1930s that are trying to apply to a workforce of the 21st century, which 1/5 of which is already gone. And it's just not working. It's not working in many ways for the independent contractor. I mean, they're happy that they've got, this kind of flexibility because the flexibility is key. And the vast majority of them are only working maybe 10 or 15 hours, sometimes a week, some say a month. There's very few of these individuals that are looking at this as a full-time job. Now, there's obviously exceptions outside of the gig thing, because there's tons and tons of freelancers, many of whom, as a result of AB5, have lost their livelihoods as a result of what Representative Lorena Gonzalez did in California with respect to AB5. They've seen their work opportunities destroyed. But at the same time, those independent contractors are looking for some other things, because in our traditional employment relationship, there's benefits and healthcare and things of that nature. Now, some of that is not quite as important as it once was because of the Obamacare. And it's interesting that many of the gig workers, at least the TNCs and the DNCs, get healthcare, perhaps from a family member, a spouse, a partner, and it's not a major reason for them. But still, it's a problem. And it's a problem for the state. So the state comes out and says, oh, we're so concerned about you because we know how you should work, even though you don't want to work the way we want to tell you to work, because we know better for you. A lot of people rebel against that. A lot of people in California did. Organized labor supported 4 out of the 12 initiatives. They lost all 4. Prop 22 was only 1. People said, no, you're not going to tell me what it is to do. So why is the state doing it? Oh, we care about you. We love you. We want to give you all of this protection. I'm not to suggest that there aren't abuses. There are. There's always abuses. But don't legislate for the 10%. Use enforcement to take care of the 10%. And legislate for the 90% to be creative. But why is the state concerned? Because the state gets a lot of money if the individual is an employee. In California, the state tax is 11-something%. And here's the biggie: unemployment. The companies are not paying unemployment because these are independent contractors. Now we get independent contractors getting unemployment, at least under the CARES Act, which may or may not expire on December 31st, but they're talking about that, and that may get extended. You know better than I that your unemployment systems are totally, completely busted. You don't have any money. You're done. So the states are saying, if we can convert these individuals to employees, guess what? We get more money. So we can talk about this all day long with respect to going down in the weeds, because AB5 is still a problem. There's going to be opportunities to try to repeal it and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, we have to find another model. And that model is going to be somewhere between an employee and an independent contractor, but still be called an independent contractor as opposed to a dependent worker, which just creates more problems in my view, which is what they have in England. And we got to find a way for the independent contractor to be able to have this workplace flexibility, but maybe to have some portable benefits. Maybe like in Proposition 22, have some guarantee of a minimum compensation, have the opportunity to get some contributions with respect to benefits. That's essentially what Proposition 22 is doing. And we may, in order to satisfy the state, have to come up with some kind of a system where the companies and maybe the individuals are paying into some kind of an unemployment fund. Because unless we do that, I don't think the states are going to be very amenable to being extremely creative on this issue. Now, I may be in a minority, but that's the way I see it. And there are serious discussions going on in order to see whether or not something like that could take place. And in the comments that we filed, the independent contractor rule, which unfortunately has not yet been issued by the current Department of Labor, which we're waiting for and holding our breath to come out and become effective before January 20, which will then be challenged by a whole bunch of state attorney generals and by a Department of Justice that doesn't want to defend the rule, for which we'll have to intervene. And we need your state attorney generals to help us on that in order to be able to defend the rule. But that's another discussion for another program, which is a pretty big deal. In our comments to that, we asked for a safe harbor. And we said that if a state does experiment, such as Prop 22, and provides for a benefit of one kind or another, that because the company and the independents are complying with a state law, that should not be considered under federal law as elements of control. Now, will this Department of Labor issue such a safe harbor? I don't know, but we made a very big point of that in the comments that we filed. So We've got a few minutes left. Josh, I don't know if you've got any questions in the queue. I don't know if Mike or Jeff want to comment off of anything that I said, but we'll give a couple of minutes back to you.
Thank you, both of you. And then I know Josh is going to come back. I think we got a few questions, so we'll go through those.
Yeah, so I have a few questions. One from Mr. Jim Stolzer, who's a representative up in South Dakota, asks, is there legislation that states can enact to protect franchises in our states?
So good news on that. South Dakota is one of the states that has already joined in our efforts to enact at least proactive joint employer legislation clarifying for the purposes of South Dakota law that franchisees and franchisors are not joint employers. So that's, they certainly, we applaud South Dakota's efforts there. And I had a great trip to Pierre a number of years ago on this issue. Lovely place. And the other issue is, as I mentioned at the outset, we are working with within the task force, the CIED task force, and then a subgroup of that, a working committee of that, to develop some model language in the worker classification space that we think will be hopefully ready for 2021 session, that states will then be able to enact policies, and like I said, that make clear worker classification is in this space. So the short answer is yes, there hopefully will be legislation that folks can take up in the 2021 session that will clarify this issue for your state.
Now, I'll add on to that too. Jeff had mentioned the working group that the CID task force has started. Rep. Stolzer, you can either contact myself or Michael Slavinsky, which will make sure to follow up with you to share the model policy that Jeff and the legislative members are working on currently, which will be up for debate tomorrow during the CID task force. And then I had one more question. So one of the problems that led to the rise of AB5 was the lack of access to benefits. Gig economy companies are sympathetic to this, but do not want the employee-employer relationship if they come up with programs to grant alternative means of access. Legislatively, how can states look to allow companies to pursue that kind of flexibility?
I mean, I'll let Michael Latito also talk to this. Is, you mentioned this as Prop 22 does essentially that. I mean, it creates more of a hybrid or third party, third type of worker, somewhere in between an independent contractor and a traditional W-2 employee. And the companies are providing, I don't know, like I said, I know Michael Latito will know this better than I will, but the companies are providing certain access to benefits under Prop, or will be under Prop 22. And these are also issues that I know have been discussed in the portable benefit type space. In my previous career working with the direct selling group, Amways and the Avons and the Mary Kays, this is something that we dealt with often. States looked at providing portable benefits. So yes, legislatively there are paths that states can go down to create access or potential access to benefits, and or as a part of that, kind of a third class of worker or a hybrid somewhere in between the independent contract and the traditional W-2 employee. I'll let Michael Latito, if you want to add on anything to that.
Well, just very quickly, because I think we may be up against the clock, but in Prop 22, what the individuals receive, the workers receive, is a payment on a monthly basis, which is called a healthcare subsidy that gives them the opportunity to then participate in a healthcare plan. So it's not like the companies came up with their plan. Now, there are exceptions to that. For example, in New York, with respect to the Black Car Fund, that's been in place for a long time with respect to the taxi cab drivers. There's a deal that Uber made some period of time where they created that kind of a fund that's administered by the International Association of Machinists. But I do think that this is an area for thoughtful experimentation. Why I'm so happy to be part of this subgroup and talking about this state legislation, because we're really at the cusp of workforce transformation here. And it's happening so quickly right before our eyes that we can't even see it. And this is one form of it. And we've got to get out of the mode of thinking that the way my father worked back in the 50s is the way people, the 1950s, is the way people work today. And we've got to be creative to provide these kinds of benefits, to create portable funds, to find different ways to fund legitimate issues, such as a state unemployment system, because an independent contractor can lose their job for different economic reasons, just like an employee can. So we need to have this kind of a discussion, and we need to have it for serious policy making without, in my view, the interest of organized labor just trying to say we will need more members. Organized labor may very well have a say in this. I'm not saying that they don't. But let's get out of the selfish interest that the reason why we're doing this is because we only represent 6% or so of the private sector. And we know that there's tremendous growth in independent contractors. And all of these individuals could be paying us $20 or $30 a month in dues. And we just clip coupons, especially with all the turnover, and we don't have to do anything for them. That's what's going on here. And I'm so pleased to be speaking with you all today and to be participating with Alec, because we can have these serious discussions, and I look forward to continuing them.
Absolutely. I think, Josh, does that clear us out?
Yeah, that concludes today's session, but definitely very informative, guys, and appreciate your thoughts. And I'm sure our legislators will have some great takeaways for this. But once again, thank you again to International Franchise Association and Littler Mendelsohn for sponsoring and participating on this session. We'll make sure to share the contact information with everyone who attended. But that concludes this session, but we are actually now going to be starting a workshop session on energy policy and what the Biden administration means for that industry. So feel free to tune into that session starting momentarily. But thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Josh. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.